Wow. Over the course of just a few months, the world watched the sudden, absolutely devastating outbreak of the 2026 Iran war. It was a conflict that literally sent shockwaves across the globe, and then, almost as suddenly as it started, it met a dramatic, diplomatic resolution. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are looking at one of the most staggering global events of our time. We're going to unpack exactly what happened, how it totally reshaped the global economy, and what this incredibly fragile peace actually means for all of us.
Ships of the world, start your engines. Let the oil flow. That was the exact message posted by U.S. President Donald Trump on his Truth Social platform on June 14, 2026. Imagine waking up to that. This surprising victory post, declaring the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, was really the first major signal to the public that a massive geopolitical shift had just occurred. A war that had crippled global shipping and energy markets was officially being put on ice. But how on earth did we get to this point, and what exactly was agreed upon?
So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll cover the outbreak of war. Second, the global economic shock. Third, forging a peace deal. Fourth, comparing the 2015 and 2026 deals. And finally, what happens next?
Okay, let's dive straight into Section 1, the outbreak of war.
This whole thing escalated at light speed. Back in January 2026, severe crackdowns by the Iranian government on civilian protests really ratcheted up international tensions. Then, on February 28th, and get this happened while nuclear negotiations were actually ongoing in Amman and Vienna. The United States and Israel launched massive surprise military strikes inside Iran. Across March and April, this just exploded into fierce retaliations and a devastating set of naval blockades, until a sudden peace deal was finally reached on June 14th.
The initial strikes, which were codenamed Operation Epic Fury by the U.S. and Operation Roaring Lion by Israel, achieved total tactical surprise. Why? Well, they hit in the morning, which was a huge departure from the usual nighttime operations. And the results were immediate and staggering. The airstrikes actually resulted in the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, alongside thousands of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps personnel, while taking a massive toll on Tehran's military and government infrastructure.
That single morning basically lit a match in a regional powder keg. Inside Iran, a massive cyber attack plunged the country into a 60-hour near-total internet blackout. We're talking connectivity dropping to literally 1%. Beyond Iran's borders, the broader Middle East was fully engulfed. In retaliation, Iran launched hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones at Israel, and at U.S. allied Arab states hosting American bases. This led to a U.S. naval blockade of Iran, Iran's reciprocal blockade of the critical Strait of Hormuz, and a very severe escalation into the 2026 Lebanon war between Israel and Hezbollah.
Which brings us to Section 2, the global economic shock. Think about this for a second. The dual blockades, with the U.S. blockading Iran and Iran effectively shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, triggered the absolute largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Nearly a fifth of the world's oil supplies typically travel through that strait, and suddenly ships were just stranded in the Persian Gulf for months. And this wasn't just some distant geopolitical issue. It caused a massive spike in the gasoline prices you pay at the pump, severely disrupted global aviation, choked the fertilizer industry, and sent total shockwaves through international financial markets.
Let's actually put some numbers to this to really grasp the scale. $29 billion. That was the estimated cost of just the U.S. military involvement by May 12th. That's a little over 2 months into the conflict. They were burning through resources so incredibly fast that the Pentagon had to rapidly request an additional $200 billion just to sustain the operations.
But, the cost extended way beyond the main combatants. By the end of March alone, neighboring Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, they suffered an immense $120 billion in financial damage. Their infrastructure was struck, their airspace was totally compromised, and their core economic arteries were severed.
And inside Iran itself, the staggering devastation reached a minimum estimated $300 billion by early April. Actually, scratch that. Some estimates suggest the true cost could be as high as $1 trillion. The sheer, unprecedented scale of financial destruction across all sides created this immense, unsustainable pressure to just stop the bleeding and find a resolution.
Moving right along to Section 3, forging a peace deal. So out of nowhere, the breakthrough was publicly confirmed by Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. Pakistan played a highly crucial role here as the primary mediator, hosting talks in Islamabad to bridge this massive divide between Washington and Tehran. And this announcement brought a profound wave of global relief. It signaled that the intensive behind-the-scenes diplomacy had actually worked.
But it also underscored just how incredibly fragile this suddenly brokered peace really was. Okay, so what exactly did they agree to? Well, the 14-point Memorandum of Understanding essentially hit the reset button to halt the economic disaster. It demanded an immediate and permanent end to military operations on all fronts, and crucially, this explicitly included halting the fighting in Lebanon. In exchange for Iran reopening the Strait of Hormuz completely toll-free, the United States agreed to lift its naval blockade and release $12 billion in frozen Iranian assets.
All right, let's look at Section 4, 2015 versus 2026 deals.
It's absolutely fascinating to look at how different these two approaches are. On one side, you have the 2015 JCPOA from the Obama era. This was classic multilateral diplomacy involving a whole coalition of nations. It offered sanctions relief up front in exchange for strict, internationally verified limits and inspections on Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, on the other side, the 2026 Trump-era framework is drastically different. It relied heavily on a maximum pressure campaign of severe sanctions, escalating into direct, devastating military strikes to degrade infrastructure. And that was then immediately followed by sudden, largely bilateral negotiations. Basically, force preceded the diplomacy. But, not everyone is convinced this new method brings lasting stability. I thought this quote from a geopolitical analyst on the r/neutral politics forum hit the nail on the head. Verbal agreements are only worth the paper they're written on. And that is the core of the skepticism right there. What we have right now is just a memorandum of understanding to stop the shooting and start the shipping. It is entirely different from a finalized treaty, meaning the absolute hardest issues of all have simply been kicked down the road.
And finally, Section 5. What happens next?
The path forward relies on what is essentially a highly fragile three-step tightrope walk. Step 1 is the immediate ceasefire and unblocking those crucial shipping lanes. Step 2 involves the U.S. transferring $6 billion, which is half of those agreed frozen assets, to Iran right up front. And Step 3 is where it gets incredibly complicated. A 60-day negotiation window where the two sides must actually sit down, finalize a permanent nuclear agreement, and figure out the lifting of any remaining sanctions.
And here is the massive elephant in the room. Prior to the war, Iran had amassed over 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to near bomb-grade purity. Now, while the U.S. and Israeli military strikes heavily degraded Iranian infrastructure, that physical uranium remains a huge central factor. Under the draft deal, Iran is supposed to dilute this highly enriched stockpile. Whether they will actually agree to do this and whether the U.S. Congress will approve the final terms is entirely unknown right now.
So as the global economy finally breathes a temporary sigh of relief, the clock is loudly ticking. Will this 60-day negotiation window actually secure a verifiable, nuclear-free agreement that appeases all sides? Or did this June 14th deal merely hit pause on a devastating regional war, setting the stage for an even larger conflict down the line? We are going to be watching those negotiations very, very closely. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.